Welcome to another episode of the Legal Gym Podcast, where we provide practical tips and strategies to help you start, build, grow, and, of course, legally protect your own online business. And now, here's your host, trademark lawyer Jim Hart.
Welcome to the Legal Gym Podcast. My name is Jim Hart, and I'm a trademark attorney. I believe that properly naming your business is one of the most important things you can do to legally protect your business. In this episode, I interview Alexandra Watkins. Alexandra is a highly acclaimed and sought-after naming expert, and she quite literally wrote the book on how to come up with an amazing name for your business, as well as avoid all of the common mistakes that many people make when naming their brand. During this interview, you will learn about Alexandra's signature SMILE method for picking the right name for your business, as well as her scratch test for avoiding the wrong names. This podcast is for educational entertainment purposes only, and nothing said is legal, ethical, or financial advice. For the show notes for today's episode, which will include all of the links and resources for everything that Alexandra and I discussed today, make sure to head on over to hawthornelaw.net/Alexandra. That's hawthornelaw.net/Alexandra. All right, let's dive in. Alexandra Watkins, thank you for being on the show today.
Good to be here.
I am so excited to talk with you today about, you've got a book on, and I'm not sure how old this book is, but it's new to me. I found it when I was in the United States. And for those of you who don't know, I met Alexandra. It was a weird situation. I found this book when I was back in the United States this summer because I'm always looking for things to help my trademark clients and things like that. And I thought, this is great. And then she posted something on LinkedIn, and I saw that she knew another lawyer that I'm friends with, and we connected, and I'm just excited to have her on the show to talk about branding and all things naming and everything related to your brand. So it's awesome to have you here.
Thank you. And I love when worlds collide, and that was a great coincidence that happened.
So tell us about you and your story and how you got into branding and naming, why you've gone down this path.
I started my career as an advertising copywriter, and every once in a while I would get thrown a bone and get to name something. And I love naming, and I was good at it, and it was fun. But I didn't know that naming was a profession, because naming is part of branding, which happens in the beginning. And I was in advertising, which happens at the end, or traditionally it used to, but now with online everything, people are advertising things right away. When I discovered naming was like I could make a living doing that, I quit my advertising job and decided I was going to be a professional namer. And people thought you can't do that. You can't just name things and make money. And I love a challenge. So yes, I did. And yeah, then I wrote the book. And so yeah, it's been a wild ride. I've been doing this almost 20 years.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about the book. The book is called Hello, My Name is Awesome: How to Create Brand Names That Stick. And why don't you tell us a little bit about the story about how you decided to write this and how this all came about?
Okay, I did not decide to write a book. I never wanted to write a book. My parents were part-time authors in addition to their day jobs, and I knew that it was a lot of work, not a lot of money. I think they did it. They were big world travelers. The World Travel Planner was one of their books. And so I never wanted to write a book. And then a publisher approached me and told me that they had gone to my website. They loved the writing on my website. I had a very fun style. And that came from being a copywriter. I learned to be a good writer. And they said, we would love for you to write a book or two, and we want to publish them. And I said, thank you, but no thanks. And they didn't let it go. They just kept pursuing me. And it's a very respected publisher called Barrett Kohler, and their office was right by my house in San Francisco. So I went in there and I talked to another author of theirs and met a lot of people, and I realized it was a great opportunity for me. And I looked them up on this website. I love this name. It's called Agents and Predators, and it's all about what helps authors avoid agents. But I didn't even need an agent because the publisher came right to me. So it was one of those Hollywood starlet stories where I was discovered. I didn't have to, most people have to work. They write the book first and then they try to find an agent. I didn't have to do any of that. That was 2014 is when the first edition came out. And almost immediately it was named a top 10 marketing book by Inc. magazine. And that helped a lot. Now I've had the second edition is the one that you have, and it's just been great for business, and it's just been really nice that I've been able to help so many people.
I've been reading through it, and so you've got a number of different techniques that you teach in this book. And before I get into that, I think it's really important because I think a lot of my clients and a lot of people that listen to this podcast probably don't understand why a name is so important, and they don't understand how having a strong name can really add value to your brand. And so maybe before we get into the how to name your business that you talk about in the book, can we talk a little bit about why a name is so important and how it can make a difference to a brand or just for an entrepreneur that's just starting out?
Sure, a name will last longer than any other investment that you make in your business. So think about your name. Think about your own personal name. You've had your name your whole life. Think about how many times somebody has said your name, seen your name, read your name, spoken your name. You can't even calculate that. So your brand name is the same way. It's going to last forever. People are going to use it. It's you have to love it. You didn't have the opportunity to name yourself, but you do have the opportunity to name your brand. So when you're starting out with a blank slate, don't want to give yourself any disadvantages. And, all of us, like Jim Hart. Okay, so your last name, you would think people would know Hart, the last name is not spelled with an E, like the love heart, but I'm sure people spell it wrong anyway, right?
Occasionally they do, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But it is easy to remember because of heart. And when people hear it, they can picture a heart in their head. So that's really good. But if you think about your own personal name, if people butcher the spelling or the pronunciation, think of all the pain that you might have with your own name and really channel that when you're naming your brand because don't give yourself any disadvantages.
Yeah. And so, what would you say to a lot of people that I work with? I wouldn't say it's a lot. The people that I work with obviously think that it's important to have a strong name because they're willing to invest in protecting their name with a federal trademark. But there's a lot of people that I talk to, or maybe don't talk to, because they are of the feeling that it's just registering a trademark. They just don't see the value in that, and they don't understand why it's important to do something like that or why they should invest in a name that's more distinctive than just describing what it is that they do. What would you say to those people who are not quite, they're maybe on the fence and they don't really understand why they need to worry so much about their name, why they just can't pick some random name and just go with it?
Oh my gosh, look, I think a lot of it just comes down to not knowing, right? You didn't learn about it in school. Most people don't know any better, right? Because they've never had to go through the trademark process and they think, oh, it happens every day. We have this test. You've seen it in the book, the Smile and Scratch test. We have it on our website. It's a 12-point name evaluation test where you can test the strength of your name. It's free on our website at eatmywords.com. Just click on test a name and we can see every day every time someone takes a test, I get an email with their name. And they take the test, they clear, the name looks good. It's got all the strengths, none of the weaknesses. And then I'll just do a quick trademark search just on USPTO, or I'll just Google search it. And the name it happened yesterday. A guy wanted to name a golf clothing brand Oasis. That's a great name. But I looked it up and I think Jack Nicholson or one of the pro golfers has a golf course with that name. And it's okay, just figure it out. First, that's going to be conflict because in the pro shop, they're selling apparel with Oasis on it. So that's a no. So I always write to the people like, okay, make sure that you trademark screen the name. But if I do a quick search and hey, great name, unfortunately it's already in use, but people don't know, or they think this happens all the time. They're like, I don't care. But it doesn't matter if you care. It matters if the patent trademark office cares, right? It matters if the other people that have the trademark or that were using the name first, it matters if they care. It doesn't matter what your risk tolerance is at all. And why I can't tell you how many times people have come to us, including an attorney whose law firm we renamed. They've had to spend all this money to rebrand because they were using a name and infringing on someone else's mark. It happens all the time. It's sad.
I obviously can't name any names, but I have very similar stories. I had somebody who called me up to do a strategy call with me, and he wanted to talk about his name, and he was so mad because there was another company out there that was using the same name, like the exact same name, and they were stealing all his clients. and
Oh,
and they had a registered trademark. And they're stealing all my clients. I've done all this work on SEO. I've done all this work to generate all this organic traffic and do all these things and blah, blah, blah. And they're getting all my clients. And they have the registered trademark and you're infringing on them. That's what they're supposed to do. He's, yeah, but they're not even really in business anymore. They're only selling 100 or 200 widgets a year. They're not really in business. You don't understand. That's not the way it works. And we had to have that hard conversation. And I'm not working with this person, so I don't know if they took my advice or not. Hopefully they did. But yeah, no, I see that. I see those same things all the time. People that they come up with these great names. And I've told them, I'm like, yes, they're like, what do you think of the name? I'm like, it's a great name, but we have to do the search. You just don't know.
and another thing that I see happen all the time is someone will buy a domain name and think that means they own the trademark. And I'm sure you see that too. And it doesn't mean that. And I got a call one time from a guy that spent 45 grand on a domain name and then found out he couldn't get it trademarked.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah. And look, I'll tell you, I'm always playing around with domain names and I forget what name I came up with, but I would have made a great name for an eyebrow bar, an eyelash bar. And where they do for men that don't know what that is, it's a place where women go to get their brows or lashes done. And it would have been a great name. And the domain name was available, but I'm like, I'm gonna check the trademark. And L'Oreal had the trademark, but they never bought the domain name. And that's something that they probably just weren't using the name yet. But a lot of times brands that have a bigger presence, all of their products fall under the umbrella brand name. So they might not have their own website for that product and they haven't bothered to buy the domain name for it because everything's under, let's say it was Ben and Jerry's. Ben and Jerry's doesn't have separate websites for all of their flavor names. So maybe if you found a flavor name and or you found a name, you're like, oh, this is great. I'm gonna name my ice cream that. You got to do your trademark research and it's you know what it just look it's hard, you're not always going to get good news, but better to get that news up front than to go down that path, invest all the money in a name and branding and identity work and then find out that it's just all been for naught and or get that cease and desist letter. That's scary.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so I'm working with a client right now who is actually taking the search part of the trademark seriously. So they keep coming to me with all these different names, but I'm interested to hear what you think about this. They've got this like strategy where they just throw a bunch of names at me and they want to know which ones stick, but the names are very random and none of them are really tied to what it is that this client is selling. And so it's on the one hand, I'm like, this is great. This client is actually doing what they're supposed to do, researching their names and making sure that these names are available. But at the same time, I feel like it's like they're just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks without really thinking about how this name is connected to their brand and what it's going to say about what their brand is ultimately going to be. And so I'm curious, so I guess this is a good time to really talk about, you've got these methods in here in your book, the SMILE method and the scratch test to help people come up with great names, memorable names, and names that are going to be able to live for a long time and really portray what their brand is all about. So maybe this is a good time to kind of transition into what those mean and how you help clients going about doing that so that they have a name that they're not just like literally picking a random word out of the dictionary that has nothing to do with what's selling.
Yeah, yes, I agree. And that's what happens. People get desperate too. They just want the name. So they'll come up with anything. And this is why all of your listeners, I'm sure this happens all the time. People are just buying up domain names because and they're not stopping to think. People spend more time considering buying a pair of shoes than they do on really thinking through their name. So these are the things you need to think through. To your point with this client that's just throwing things at the wall. The S in smile stands for suggestive, and you want your name to suggest something positive about your brand. It's really important that your name evokes something. I used to say that evokes something about your brand, what your brand is or does, but in the case of a name like Twizzlers for licorice, look, candy is all about fun and enjoyment. Twizzler is it's fun to say. Abba Zaba, one of my favorite names ever. It doesn't say anything about what the candy tastes, but it's fun and pleasurable. Candy gets a break. But you want your name to suggest something about your brand. Amazon suggests something very large, and that's what Jeff Bezos was going for. Large, vast, lots of tributaries, which I love. S, suggestive, and the M in smile stands for memorable. Everyone says, I want a memorable name, but what makes the name memorable? There actually is something that makes a name memorable. And it's if it's already based, if it already exists in your knowledge base, it's going to make it easier to remember. You all know kryptonite from the Superman comics. We know kryptonite repels Superman. So when the a bike lock company, wanted to evoke that their bike locks were strong and could repel bike thieves, they named themselves Kryptonite. Like super smart, we get it. And when we see the name Kryptonite, it's because we have an existing relationship with the name, it makes it easier for us to not only remember, we understand it right away. And that's a metaphorical names. And those metaphorical names work really well. That's where you're taking the properties of one thing and transferring it to your brand. The I in smile stands for imagery. And Jim, I talked about your name, Jim Hart. People hear heart, they can picture a heart in their head. Kryptonite, lots of imagery. Amazon imagery. I've been to the Amazon, so I picture the Amazon, but maybe you picture an Amazonian woman, somebody large. That really helps with imagery. People remember pictures much more easily than they remember words or letters. And why this is important is, let's say you're with the bike lock, maybe you don't need a bike lock right away, but you hear the name Amazon, but then your bike gets stolen and you're on Amazon, or you go to the bike shop and you're like, what was the name of that one that repels thieves? Oh, you're recalling it from your brain's dusty filing cabinet, right? You're pulling it right out. Kryptonite, that's the lock you're gonna get.
Oh, that's
And
interesting. I never thought of that.
yeah,
That's perfect.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's another kryptonite is a U-shaped bike clock, and there's another, it looks very similar. It's called it's spelled ABUS, and I don't know if it's Abus or a bus, but I finally figured out a way to remember it is if your bike gets stolen, you might need to take a bus. But
Oh,
no one else is gonna think of that, right? Like a bus, a bus. You can't, your brain can't latch on to anything. But kryptonite, it really speaks volumes. And you want, look, a name can be one, two, three words. My company name is 3 words. Eat my words, 3 short little words. But you only have a little small short space to communicate. So you want your name to say as much as possible in as few words as possible. Then the L in smile stands for legs, and legs means that your name lends itself to a theme, and that is really fun. So for instance, with Eat My Words, our blog is called The Kitchen Sink. We have packages like supermarket special and the whole enchilada. So here's an example for all of you entrepreneurs out there. This is one people love. We named a woman had a PR firm. Her name is Lynette Hoy. She's a very fiery woman and relentless with the press. We rebranded her Fire Talker PR. Her tagline is hot on the press. She calls herself the fire chief. So that's
I
where the
love it.
legs are coming into play, right? So her title, fire chief, she works in the firehouse. So she's branded her office again, extending the legs, extending the mileage of her brand. Her theme song is Fire by the Ohio Players. Everyone should have a theme song. My theme at Eat My Words theme song is Sugar by the Archies. I also have the Candyman, Sammy Davis Jr., two old school names for those of us old enough to remember. And yeah, have a lot of fun, right? And Lynette, some of her packages, controlled burn, fire starter. So when you have a theme, and it's not just you that will come up with these, or if you work with a company, Eat My Words will help you, but people, your customers will come up with ideas for you. And it's a lot of fun. People like that. And when you have a name like a Fire Talker PR or Eat My Words, you're going to get a lot of comments on it. I can't tell you how many times just someone asked for my email address. I was at the doctor's office the other day and they asked for my email address and I gave Alexandra at eatmywords.com and the woman just smiled. That's a great name. I like that. It just feels good. And wouldn't it be nice when you gave your email address to someone if oh, I like that. What is that? And then the E in smile stands for emotional, and you need your name to make an emotional connection with your target audience, or it's going to go right over their head, right? So you want something that resonates with people.
Yeah, I see so many clients that they come up with these names. And as their lawyer, my job is to try and helping them and guide them and try and make sure their names are protected. And I get clients that come up with great names and you can see a lot of these elements in them. And I get other clients that don't have the great names. And I try and work with them to try and develop a better name. But I'm definitely going to have to send more of them to you because they definitely all these things make so much sense to me, and it's why weren't we thinking of this before? But I'm so glad to hear your take on this. Okay, so we've got that. So then maybe some of these people that have not gone through the smile method to develop their name, maybe they need to go through the scratch test, and maybe put their names up against the scratch test to see if their names really have what it takes or if they need to go back to the drawing board. Am I getting that right?
Yes, and all of these 7 things are going to be problematic for you. I promise you. Don't think, well, I just have one. I was on a podcast yesterday and the podcast used a number in their name. And that was problematic for them because every time they say their name, they have to spell it out for people. Numeral 2, for instance, or numeral 4 instead of the word. Okay, so the S in Scratch stands for spelling challenge. This is a really big one. If your name looks like a typo, or if it has a problem in it, such as a number, scratch it off the list. Don't make it difficult for people. You want your name to be friction free. Don't have any annoyances in your name.
Okay, I've got a question about that.
Mhm.
So what about people that use different spellings of let me give you an example. I see. So this is an audio
I know you
podcast, so
can see
people
me.
can't see you
I know
shaking your
they
head. I
can't
knew
see
you
me
were going to say
shaking my
this.
head, but sorry, yeah, don't have a poker face. Sorry.
No, that's fine. So the question I was going to have, so people that would use the word like easy versus like easy. What do you think of something like that?
Hate. I hate it. It's because you just have to spell it for me. Yes. Okay. Why would you do that? And I get it. People do it to get the trademark. I don't understand how that's possible because I thought if something sounded identical, so if you were telling me about a new hair conditioner called Easy and I didn't know that it was spelled that way, I'm gonna have trouble finding it, right? Or this is a classic misspelling. There's a chocolate company named Cho, but it's spelled TCHO. That's a weird spelling of Cho, right? Like the silent T, very strange. I don't like those. And I don't, Jim, how do people get those trademarked if they sound identical to a name that has been trademarked that's spelled correctly?
if the word easy, for example, like EASY, if that is trademarked and somebody else tried to trademark EZ, like the two letters, it would be a conflict. It would absolutely be a conflict, because
Okay.
when I'm doing a trademark search, we're looking for similar spellings, but sound the same phonetically. We're looking for all those things. It was interesting because I've had names like that come up in the past, and I've done my initial search and the search appears to come back clean, but sometimes the algorithms on this search software that we use don't always pick up everything. So sometimes I redo a second search with a different way that they spell the name, or I do it with I use a couple different search companies, and it'll come back from another one where I will find something that's problematic. Yeah, so if there's two words and they're identical, except for one is spelled easy and one is spelled EZ and then some sort of modifier after it, yeah, it's gonna get flagged and the trademark attorney is gonna find it. So no, you're not doing it to get the trademark. You're doing it, in all likelihood, they're doing it to get a web domain is the way I
Yeah.
look at it. I think that's why they're doing it.
Yeah. There's this gym. I think it might be a national chain. It's called Choose, and it's spelled CHUZ. Like, that's a horrible spelling. Oh no, the worst one ever was a organic baby clothing company, and it was called it's weird. It was called Species, which is just a horrible name as it
For a
is,
baby
because
company?
yes,
Sounds like an alien.
Species. Oh, I know, they're no longer in business, but it was spelled
Surprise, surprise.
SP.
Or they rebranded.
I know. I'm accused, and I'm sorry if you're offended by me being mean. I always
No,
say
I'm not offended. Go ahead.
okay, I'm sorry to your listeners. I can be like the Kathy Griffin of brand names. Yes, I can be mean, but okay, Species was spelled SPEES. And they said on their website, and this is verbatim, that the reason that Species was spelled that way because quote, that's how babies would spell species if babies could spell, end quote. That's so lame. That's so lame. Come on, really? It's you were talking about your client throwing things at the wall, just trying to find something. So there's another gym, Orange Theory. What the heck is that? Orange Theory, for the longest time, I thought it was a juice bar. And the
That's what I would think.
owner right? And the founder said that she liked that the name was arbitrary. No, sorry, not arbitrary, ambiguous. Nothing about your business should be ambiguous. Nothing. And how many people have driven by there thinking it was a juice bar? Like, how would you know that was a gym?
So I have an example, and I need to call my wife in. I might need to call my wife in, because there is a restaurant, and I want to say it was back in Cary in North Carolina when we went back to visit, and we kept seeing this place. And oh, that's what it was. I remember that. What are those animals? They're like not llamas,
Alpaca?
alpacas. And so the restaurant was a picture of an alpaca, and I can't remember. It might have been called Alpaca or something. So that was the name of it. It was called Alpaca, and the logo is it's a picture of an alpaca, and the name of the place is Alpaca. And can you guess what they said? What would you think they would sell?
Wait, I thought you said it was a restaurant.
It is a restaurant.
Oh, what kind of food?
Peruvian chicken.
Okay, that's really weird. I was gonna guess Peruvian, but yeah, Peruvian chicken. Peruvian. Oh, that's too bad, because Peruvian's good. But yeah, I wouldn't get that out of alpaca.
Are alpacas from Peru? I don't
Yeah,
know. I
yeah.
guess maybe they must be.
Yes, they
So
are.
anyway,
Yes.
yeah. So like
One spit at me. One spit at me when I was in Peru.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go to your website, Google alpaca chicken, and that's the restaurant. And it's like
That's weird.
we must have driven by it all these times, and we're like, we thought it was like a store for people that had alpacas. We thought it was like a store where you would buy like products for your alpaca, or maybe you buy I don't know what you would buy. We don't have alpacas, but it was very confusing to us. It didn't make any sense.
That's a disconnect. Another restaurant disconnect name. Speaking of, you'll know this because as an attorney, you must know Latin.
Oh yeah, I know so much Latin.
More than me. No
I
one
don't know
knows
about
more
that.
than my mother, though. I didn't go to private school. One of her biggest regrets not sending me to private school. So this restaurant, it's in San Francisco and it's called SPQR. SPQR, which first of all is like impossible to remember, right? There's no, unless you know what SPQR is in Latin, there's no way for your brain to remember that jumble of letters, right? That's like alphabet soup. That's not what they specialize in, though. But SPQR is Latin for the Senate and the Roman people. Okay, where's the Q? And if you look it up online, a lot of people ask that question. Wait, what? The Senate and the Roman people, SPQR? I don't get it. It doesn't match up. Yeah.
What do they
That's
sell?
definitely oh, it's a restaurant. I don't know what kind of food it is, but that's an example of somebody they're being too clever and they know what it means. It's what I call the curse of knowledge. That's the second C in Scratch. They know what it means, but they forget that nobody else knows what it means.
Yeah, I have to say, I think that's the problem that I did have with my first law firm name, with the Hawthorne Law. I think we talked about this last time we
Yeah,
talked.
but I like that name. I
But
really like that name.
I think it's a good name. I just think it's and I was being too, I don't know. I think, yeah, it
I
doesn't,
like the
most
name.
people don't understand. They think it's my last name.
Oh, okay. I can see that because Hawthorne is a last name, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, here, I'm going to give everyone, this is an interesting story. So we all know Tommy Bahamas, right? And Tommy Bahama is not a real guy. No one's last name is Bahama, right? So there's no confusion there. Just like the restaurant Johnny Rockets, no one's last name is Rocket. So I was working on naming this restaurant, and this is a trademark issue. It was
Okay.
in Canada, and this restaurant, it was called Joey's. And Joey's started out as a hamburger stand, and it grew, and they had all these locations, and it became this high-end restaurant, like super fancy. They didn't allow children or like they didn't have baby seats, right? Which,
Um,
so they were known for their bellinis, and they were facing infringement from someone in Canada who was using the name Joey's before they were. And so they brought me up there to Vancouver, and I came up with this great name based on the fact that bellinis, they were all about bellinis, that they sold pictures of bellinis. That's what they were famous for. So I said they should change the name to Joey Bellini's because they would keep Joey, and then so they would have that lateral move, but then Bellini's, everyone would know that. Oh, and by the way, Joey wasn't a real person. So people would call and they talk to the PR people. Oh yeah, people always want to interview Joey, but there is no Joey. So I said, call it Joey Bellini's. There will be no mistaking. No one will think that's a real person. And I looked it up the other day, and somehow they're still using Joey's. Like they did something to the name, I forget what, but they were able to still use it. Or maybe they paid off the other Joey's. Years ago, there was this kind of product of the year. And it was back when Sex in the City was really popular. And they were these little 4-packs of pre-made cocktails, and they were called Cocktails by Jen. And you bought the package, and there were this little insert with, "Hi, I'm Jen, and I started this company because I used to invite my girlfriends over to watch Sex in the City, and I'd make cocktails, and all of my friends said, you should package those." So I did. Oh, great story. Guess what? There was no Jen. It was started by two guys. So their PR person, who I also knew, said people would always want to interview Jen, and she didn't know what to say because there was no Jen. So I told her, you should just say, "Sorry, Jen's in rehab." She's not doing interviews right now. But yeah, so you got to be careful, be authentic. But like with Tommy Bahama, like nobody is expecting that's a real person.
Now you've ruined that for me because I thought it was. No, I'm just
Did you
kidding.
really know?
No, I probably thought, I know Bahamas didn't make sense, but maybe I thought that like Tommy was somebody that maybe
Maybe
could have
there's a
connected.
Tommy. I don't know. It's a great name. It really
Yeah.
is.
I think that I thought I never thought that Tommy Bahamas. I didn't think that was like a real name, but I did think maybe that Tommy was somebody. I don't know. But Stacy's Pita Chips, Stacy was a real person.
I
I don't know if
believe
you know
that.
that. Yeah.
I believe that.
She did an interview on that How I Built This with Guy Raz. I love that podcast talking about all the brands and that people build. I don't know if you've heard it, but
Oh, no, I never heard that podcast. Oh, that sounds
yeah.
good.
Yeah, it's good. Anyway, okay, so I don't remember which one we're at. We started with
Oh,
S,
we put it
spelling
around. Okay, so
challenge.
yeah, spelling challenge. So okay. The second, so we did the S spelling challenge. The first C in Scratch is copycat, and copycat that plays right into trademark infringement because you don't want to be a copycat for that reason, but you also don't want to be a copycat because why be somebody else when you can be yourself? And when people see a copycat name, so I'll give you an example. There's a very known frozen yogurt brand called Pinkberry. Not a great name, but they've been successful. I think Paris Hilton was probably photographed eating Pinkberry or wearing a t-shirt, and the brand took off. So one time I was like, I'm going to see how many other brands are copying Pinkberry. So I just started putting words in front of berry and typing them into Google. So with frozen yogurt. So I did Blissberry, Yoberry, Yumberry, Coolberry. They were all taken as frozen yogurt stores. Some of them even had almost identical looking logos. And it's like really, I have a whole slide of them. If you take my online course, you'll see the slide. It's amazing. And how many people just rip them off. And when people see a name like that, like they see Yoberry, Yumberry, the first thing they do is roll their eyes and say, oh, they copied Pinkberry. And another name that ripped them off, this wouldn't be infringement, but it was very unoriginal, and it was red mango. And why is that a ripoff? Because it's a color and a fruit, right? Come on, I've named 3 frozen yogurt stores. None of them have a color or a fruit or the word berry. One of my favorites is a self-serve frozen yogurt place, and it's called Vincent Van Yo. And the tagline is "Make your own masterpiece." Because we all love to go when we're making frozen yogurt, everybody's making their own creation, right? And then you show your friend, this is what I
That's
made.
cool.
Yeah.
That's really clever.
Thank you. Thank you. I love clever names. And one of the things I like about clever names, we named frozen yogurt, my most famous frozen yogurt store name was a franchise called Spoon Me. And Spoon Me had great legs, and we talked about legs. Their t-shirts were "Shut Up and Spoon Me." They had booty shorts with "Spoon Me" on them. Their restrooms had movie phrases that had "Spoon Me" in them and swapped out. From Jerry Maguire, you had me at hello, it said you had me at Spoon Me. And from Rocky, yo Adrian, let's spoon. And these were, I talked about how your customers get involved. A lot of these were thought of by the customers who would suggest them to the people at Spoon Me. If you love me, spoon me. I met a guy, a fellow author. We have the same publisher, Seth Adam Smith, and he was going to BYU. Because Spoon Me's based in Utah. He was going to BYU. He was dating this woman, Kim, and he wanted to move her out of the friend zone into the girlfriend zone, and he didn't quite know how to do that. So he took her to Spoon Me, and she got the hint. And now they've been married for years and have
Oh, that's
kids.
cute.
And I love that. Yeah, we named an ice cream store Smitten, and also lots of love stories, engagements, weddings catered by Smitten. So yeah, it's always fun when things like that happen. But yeah, if you have a love at first sight name, it's so great. I mean, I know with Eat My Words, it's one of those names. And like we named a GPS for dogs, Retriever. People hear that name and it just makes them, I can see you laughing right now. It makes
Yeah.
people smile.
Yep. It absolutely
Yeah.
does. And that is something I see a lot from people is they try and come up with names and they try and put their spin on things, but don't without realizing that the standard for trademarks is likelihood of confusion. It's not, people think it doesn't have to be, it has to be identical to be confused, and it doesn't have to be identical. You can be very similar and still be problematic. Interestingly enough, as an aside, our favorite frozen yogurt place, and it's actually a custard stand, in Cary, North Carolina, and Raleigh, that whole area where I live in when I'm in the States, is called Goodberries. And anyway, it's got, I don't think I've never heard of Pinkberry, so maybe that's more of a West
Oh,
Coast
okay.
thing. So I don't know. Goodberries has been around for a while. So anyway, okay. So we've got spelling challenge, we've got copycat, and then what's the next one in the scratch?
The R stands for restrictive, and restrictive means that you outgrow your name. Example, 24-hour fitness. Not all of them are open 24 hours anymore. Hotel Tonight used to be where you could just book a hotel for the night. Now you can book a hotel 365 days in advance. Better name for them might have been Get a Room, which I think was the original idea behind Hotels Tonight. And plus, it's a fun name. It makes people smile. So yeah, when you're naming your business, look into your crystal ball and try to think, what could we be in the future? The most famous example I could think of outgrowing your name, a store in Canada is called Canadian Tire. People visit Canadian Tire. A lot of people visit it twice a week. Obviously, you don't need tires twice a week. Canadian Tire sells way more than tires. They sell toys, t-shirts, tents, trampolines, tropical plants, and lots of other things that start with letters other than T. It's like a Home Depot-ish kind of store. So they outgrew their name a really long time ago, and they should have changed it while they were outgrowing it. My favorite example, though, sorry, I have lots of examples. Okay, Fast Signs. You might have heard of Fast Signs. Yeah, Fast Signs, right? It's a sign company. But their tagline is more than fast, more than sign. So they outgrew their name.
Yep.
It's a waste of a tagline, right? Canadian Tire's tagline in the 80s was "We sell more than tires." What a waste. And you know what? Everyone in Canada by now knows that Canadian Tire sells way more than tires. But what if Canadian Tire wanted to roll into the US? And they're not going to, like Canadian Tire, how would anybody driving by know that they sold way more than tires?
No, they wouldn't. No, they wouldn't.
No, so you got to change your name. And it's never too late to change your name. We recently renamed a bank that was more than 100 years old. They were First National Bank of Syracuse. They were in Syracuse, Kansas, not Syracuse, New York. So that was confusing because you might be a Kansas local and see First National Bank of Syracuse. Syracuse is a tiny little town in Kansas, but it's a big regional bank. But you might think, oh, I'm not banking at a New York bank. Not even realizing Syracuse, Kansas, this tiny little town, an hour from the closest airport, smallest airport I've ever flown into in my life, with no food court, just vending machines with nothing in them. 2 flights in a day, 2 flights out a day. Small. We rebranded them Dream First. They want an aspirational name. They're all about making dreams come true, doing lots of big funding for people's farms, agriculture, large equipment purchases, generational wealth. Dream First. Much better name.
Yeah.
So that's so the A in Scratch stands for annoying. Annoying, we talked about putting letters in your name. Annoying names are anything that frustrates people. Names spelled backwards. Oh, it's very clever. But look, just because something is clever or creative doesn't mean it's a good idea. Wearing 2 different colored socks, that's very creative. Is it a good idea? Not if you're going on a job interview, unless it's on Zoom. Our doormat on our front door says, "Hold on, we might not be wearing pants." I think it's so funny, but we're usually not wearing shoes because we're in San Diego.
Yeah.
But okay, so that's annoying. Tame is the T in Scratch. You don't want your name to be tame and descriptive, right? And you can speak to descriptive names. You want to talk about those from a trademark perspective?
But yeah, that's what I was actually thinking about with Canadian Tire, but I'm guessing that it's been around enough that it's established some credibility as a trademark and things like that. It sounds like it's been around since the 80s, you said. But yeah, no, so names that are overly descriptive. So there's on the continuum of names that can be trademarked, you have the generic names, descriptive names, and then suggestive, arbitrary, and fanciful. But the 2 that cannot be trademarked are generic and descriptive. And so a descriptive name is exactly what you'd think. It's if you went out and said, I'm trying to think of a good example that's not too generic. Just Canadian Tire. That sounded to me like a very descriptive name. So if it has a Canadian trademark, they can come to the United States and get it registered in the United States, and they probably have. But just being a tire store on and of itself and calling yourself the tire store, that means that's a very generic name. If you called yourself like the milk store or the coffee store or the computer store or anything like that, those are descriptive, or excuse me, generic names that are incapable of trademarks. I see a lot of people that have names that are not, there's this fine line between suggestive and descriptive, and there's no real good bright line test. It's usually up to the examining attorney. And I've got all these ideas in my head or thoughts in my head of them, but I don't really want to give them away because they're clients. But just suffice it to say, if it's too descriptive of what you're selling and not suggestive enough, Greyhound is a great suggestive name that I've used as an example, because it's suggestive of this bus line that's fast and gets you from point to point really quick. It's suggestive. But if that Greyhound was somehow tied to the dogs, then that might be more of a descriptive name. And in that case, it would not be capable of registration. Now, what you can do is you can get on the supplemental register. And if you're on the supplemental register for 5 years, then you can reapply. And at that point, your name has developed some notoriety in the marketplace. And then you can actually get back on the principal register. But you'd have to reapply after 5 years.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So now the main difference between principal and supplemental is supplemental, there's a higher burden of proof. If you need to sue somebody for infringement in federal court, you have to actually prove that you've been using the trademark and things of that sort. Versus with the principal register, you just go in with your trademark certificate, and that's enough for the court to say, yeah, you've got a trademark. So there's a higher standard of proof for a name on the supplemental register. But it's important to understand that if you have a descriptive name, they're not great, and it's hard to tell what's descriptive and what's not. I have a client that, and I'm trying to think, I don't really want to divulge the client name, so I'll just say that he had a name that was denied for being descriptive. We were able to overcome it and got it on the principal registry. Evidently my arguments were persuasive, but you don't want to get in that situation. So I think it's better to just have a suggestive, fanciful, or arbitrary name from the beginning. And I think what you're talking about with a name that's tame and like that, it's usually a name that's very descriptive and is not really going to be capable of trademark registration. Or if it is, it's going to give you problems.
Or it's just boring. I don't
boring.
think you can,
Yep.
I don't think that, I feel like there's so much noise out there right now that you can't afford to be a wallflower. You have to stand out in a sea of sameness. And that's why I like when people are bold, and the smaller clients I work with are way more fearless than the bigger clients. The bigger clients, obviously, they have more money, so I have to work them. I like working with those brands, but they test their names and things get watered down, and where the smaller clients are going to take much more. When I say risk, I don't mean trademark risk. Just they're going to go out there with something that's a more disruptive, as far as, oh, that's not a name that you would expect from a big brand. I like that, because that's how you get noticed, when you have a name that's really different and distinctive. I wanted to ask you about, so if you were, because I barely know anything about trademarking, despite how long I've been doing this, and it always makes me nervous. If you were like the San Diego Coffee Company, you can't trademark that, right? Or could you?
That's interesting. You have to file the application, no, for sure, but that would probably be. So if it's been, I don't know how long it's been. Is that an actual
no,
company?
I just made that up. Or Joe's Dry Cleaner, Joe's San Diego Dry Cleaners, right?
Let's go with San Diego Coffee Company. I think that's a great example, because generally speaking, if it has the geography in it, you've got two issues there. It's geographically descriptive, and it's also just descriptive on its face. So the question will be whether the trademark attorney that's examining the application would deem that to be a descriptive name or a generic name. I think a strong argument could be made that it's a descriptive name, and thus it could be put on the supplemental register.
Okay.
And then that would give that company a path to being on the principal register after 5 years. So if there's a business in place and it's got that name and that's what they want to be known as, I don't think that's the strongest name. I agree with you. I think it's a tame name, but there's a difference between a brand new business that names himself as the San Diego Coffee Company and a business that's been operating for 20 years as the San Diego Coffee Company, because that business that's been out there for 20 years with that name is going to have some notoriety in the marketplace, and it's going to have name recognition, and it's not going to be as generic or even descriptive as one that's just starting out. Does that make sense? So the
Yeah,
longer
yeah,
they're in
that
business,
totally
the
makes sense.
stronger the name becomes.
Okay. I was going to ask you a question about, genericide. Can you speak to genericide? Because I find that really fascinating. So many clients come to us and they're like, oh, I want my name to be a verb. And I'm like, no, you don't want your name to be a verb because you're going to spend or too much of a, I don't want to say a household name, like rollerblade everyone was calling their inline skates rollerblades. So rollerblade had to invest a lot of money to educate people, just their rollerblade inline skates, Kleenex tissues, Xerox photocopies, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and you think about it with Google also, because people are Googling stuff, and Xerox is a great example. And so Xerox, I think it was Xerox or I think it was Kleenex, actually did a pretty extensive ad campaign
Mm-hmm.
to go out there and say that you are using Kleenex brand
Dude.
tissues
Yeah.
as opposed to just using Kleenex. Yeah, so I'm not sure what exactly.
Why? So what happens? Like Adobe right now, people talk about Photoshop, right? Just Photoshop it. Photoshop has become, to me, very generic for saying that you're going to alter the photo, but maybe you're using AI to do that. Maybe you're not using Photoshop anymore, but it's so
Mhm,
generic. And for me, I've always felt like with rollerblades, let's talk about them. So rollerblades, super high quality product, more expensive than generic knockoff brands, right? So rollerblade doesn't want other brands being referred to as rollerblades because nobody wants to they don't want people talking smack about their product when they're not even talking about their product.
mhm. Yeah, so it's really that's where companies, bigger companies, I'll say, and this is the smaller companies are not going to have to worry about this because until they get big enough that they do have to worry about it, is this is where it's important to have ad campaigns that kind of combat this, or instructions and different things and disclaimers whenever people purchase this, and to send out to be very vigilant in policing their trademark to make sure people aren't using it incorrectly in the marketplace, because the risk of genericide is that a brand could become so generic over time that it actually loses its effectiveness as a trademark and therefore could be canceled. And a trademark is only as good as long as the company is using it in commerce for their business. And if it becomes too generic, we already talked about, a generic trademark is not capable of being registered on the principal or the supplemental registry. Yeah, that is a risk. And so it comes down to money and marketing departments and branding strategies to go out there and really combat that, the possibility that the brand could become too generic. But yeah, I didn't even realize that rollerblades, honestly, I thought that rollerblades, that's just what they were called. I didn't know that was a brand. So that's a perfect
Yeah, there you
example of
go.
how
There you
that
go.
could be a
No,
problem.
it's
So what is it?
yeah.
Rollerblade brand inline skates. I don't know what it is, but
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And like
So
with onesies, we all know baby onesies, but who knew that's a registered trademark of Kimberly Clark? And if you
didn't know it.
use onesies on eBay, for instance, they police that heavily. And if you're talking about a onesie and it's not a Kimberly Clark onesie, they will shut you down.
Oh wow. Yeah,
It's a
no, I didn't know that.
baby jumpsuit. Yeah. There's a fascinating, if you go on Wikipedia and you look up genericide, it has a list of companies that have lost their trademark, right? Like
Yep.
Escalator is a
Yep, I've
dumpster.
heard that
Like
one.
all of these, yeah, it's fascinating. It's really interesting.
No, that is interesting. So yeah, that it's the curse of success, right? They get too good and they're too popular and
Yeah.
too well known, and then they lose their trademark.
The curse of
So
success. I like
yeah.
that. And speaking of curse of success, so the second C in Scratch, we talked about being the curse of knowledge. We talked about foreign words. Don't name your company anything that in a foreign, or product, something in a foreign language, unless it's a really common word that people know. And
Yeah.
then lastly, the H in Scratch stands for hard to pronounce. Nobody wants to butcher your name. And if
Like
you have a hard,
SPQR.
yeah, or think about my neighbor Bob. Bob's 75. He has called me Alexandria for the last 5+ years. I don't have the heart to correct him and tell him that my name doesn't have an I in it and it's Alexandra. And you know what? It would be embarrassing for me. Like, I would just cringe to have to tell him, but think of how bad he would feel if I had to tell him, you've been calling me the wrong name for over 5 years. So nobody wants to pronounce a name wrong at all. And you want your name only to be pronounced one way. So there's no confusion. One person's talking about it's a plant-based protein, you put it in your smoothies. It's spelled VEGA. And I was like, I wonder
Oh,
how that's
Vega.
pronounced. How did you know?
I don't know. That's why I thought it
How
was
does
Vega.
I don't know why it's just me, but I'm thinking, okay, if it's, is it Vega, like vegan, Veja, like vegetarian, or
Oh,
Vega, like the old car, right? Like the car from the
honestly, I don't
70s?
know. I'm guessing. I have
But
no
I guess,
idea.
yeah, but most people do guess Vega. But see, I would think Veja, like Vegemite, vegetarian, or Vega, like vegan.
It
But
could
the
be.
only
It could
reason
be.
I know, oh, you know how I found out? I called the company. I have, I'm very stealthy. I called the company after hours and I heard it on their voicemail.
So, so what
So
is
that's
it?
how I know. It's
Is it?
Vega.
Oh, okay. Oh, look, I was
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. But look at, you know what? The one that everybody gets wrong is the beverage, the sparkling water. Is it LaCroix,
Oh,
LaCroix,
yeah.
or LaCroix, right? Like people don't,
I'm guessing it's LaCroix because it's
I
French,
think it
right?
is LaCroix. I can't remember.
Yeah. So I told you before we were recording that I've been in Paris for the past like 5 or 6 days.
Uh-huh.
And so I found that uh, there was a great brand that we walked into that I don't know, it's going to be very memorable. It was like a pastry shop. In most pastry shops, when you go in, it's like a patisserie or a croissanterie or something like that. And just that's all they put on their sign. But this was very clearly a brand that they were thinking through how they were going to market themselves in Paris and probably throughout Paris. I don't know if I haven't seen them anywhere else. But the name of the company, the name of the shop was The French Bastard. And I just thought that was, I don't know, I just really liked it. And I
That's funny.
suspect if we spent more time there, we would have noticed that there would probably be other things connected to that, like the names of their breads or different things like that. So it was one of those good examples of how it stand out in my head and I remembered it. And versus the other, we were testing out pastries or croissants throughout the city, all for 5 days. We're just like looking for croissants to buy. And there was another one across the street, actually had a better croissant, but I couldn't tell you the name to save my life because it was
Yeah,
some other weird name. But anyway, the French Bastard.
that's fun. Yeah, people
So
remember. You're gonna remember the French Bastard. It's fun.
yes,
It's
and I'll
like
remember. Okay, I,
that fan company, Big Ass Fans. People remember that name or that golf club name. Is it? Is there a golf club named Fat Bastard? There's a Big Bertha. Yeah,
Big
people
Bertha.
like. Yeah, people like stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're right. Yeah, and they're fun, and like you said, they're fun to say, and you can build a brand around that. You with other names that are very similar. Yeah, you can be as creative as you want to be. It's really pretty astounding what people can come up with. Anyway, so let's see. Let's see. That was the last one, the
Yep.
curse of knowledge. So we went through today the scratch method to figure out the deal breakers for your name. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh shoot, I messed that up, then maybe it's time to think about coming up with another name. And then the smile method is, and I love those names, by the way, the like you really, not only do you have all the individual components, but smile just gives me the sense of you're coming up with a name that's going to make you smile anyway. And the scratches, we're going to scratch that one off. So I'm sure you did that intentionally, I'm guessing. But yeah, so we've gone through those, but there's so much more in your book that I think we need to go through, but we've been talking for looks like almost an hour and a half now. So a little bit over what we talked, what we talked going to have to do. We talked about how long we were going to have to talk. But so Alexandra, I would love to have you back another
Yes, I would love
time
to come back. I love talking to you.
and talking more about some of these other ideas you have in the book and things that people should do and things that people shouldn't do. And then also, but before we go tonight or this morning for you, tell us a little bit more about where people that are listening can find out more about what you're doing and what do you have going on right now. You've got the book, Hello, My Name is Awesome, which I recommend everyone buy. I'll have a link in the show notes to this. But what else, where else can people find you and learn more about what you're doing?
You can find me at eatmywords.com is the website. And like I said, you can test a name there for free through the Smile and Scratch Test. It will walk you through it and give you feedback along the way. You can find me on LinkedIn. My email is alexandra@eatmywords.com if you have any questions for me. And I just want to share a piece of news. Recently, Time Magazine, I know you guys can't see this, but Jim, you can see this. Kim
Yep.
Kardashian on the cover, the 100 most influential companies, and a company that Eat My Words named is on the list. And it is a vertical farming company called Plenty. Plenty was named C. Jane Farm, but they realized pretty quickly that not everyone understood that C. Jane Farm was made a nod to the books, the Dick and Jane books that we read as kids, because people under a certain age didn't understand. They weren't familiar with those. There was nothing in the existing knowledge base, and it was a weird name, CGen Farm. What is that? We rebranded them as Plenty. They couldn't get the trademark in food, so they got the trademark in agriculture, which I thought was pretty clever. But yeah, vertical farming, so they're very progressive, and now they have product in Walmart. I guess they
Wow.
were able to somehow get the trademark for food.
Oh, wow. That's cool. Great.
Yeah.
Alexandra, thank you so much for being on the show today. And I look forward to talking with you again, hopefully very soon. And yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, all you Legal Gym listeners, now that you know more about how to properly name your business, you are ready to implement. Because if there's one thing that we love to do over here at the Legal Gym, it's to take massive action. So if you haven't already, make sure to check out the show notes page for today's episode. You can get a rundown of all the links and resources we talked about here today with Alexandra by visiting hawthornelaw.net/Alexandra. That's hawthornelaw.net/Alexandra. That's going to be the home base for all of your legal and business tools and resources to help you start, build, and of course, legally protect your very own business. Thank you so much for listening today. Don't forget to share this episode with your friends and business colleagues who might need this information. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you so much and have a great day.